My mother suddenly accused me of stealing her jewelry to impress my friends. You think you're better than us now? She slapped me in front of my friends. A month later, a pawn shop receipt arrived with her name on it. You think you're better than us now, huh? She shouted. Coming in here with your college friends, acting all high and mighty. Mom, I didn't, I tried to explain. Her hand cracked across my cheek before I could finish. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in that house. I don't know how to write this without sounding bitter, but I'll try to be as honest as I can. I'm 23, female, and my relationship with my mother, Nadine, late 40s, has always been complicated. I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. If you know it, you probably know it as a working-class city with old mill buildings and neighborhoods that haven't changed in decades. Our house was one of those: peeling green paint, rusted fence, chain-link gate that never latched properly. My father left when I was 11. No big goodbye, just gone. A note on the fridge and a stack of overdue bills. My mother never recovered. Not emotionally, not financially. She worked long hours at a senior care facility, on her feet all day, dealing with patients, doctors, families. It made her cold, hard, resentful. She never said it out loud, but I knew she saw me as a burden. I was the kid who asked too many questions. The one who didn't know how to sit still and be quiet. I learned early on to stay out of her way when she was tired, which was most of the time. My little brother Felix got the softer version of her, at least for a while. He was younger, more agreeable. He didn't push back like I did. I don't blame him. You learn how to survive in a house like ours. By some miracle, or maybe just sheer stubbornness, I got a full scholarship to Smith College. I applied behind her back because I knew what she'd say: college is for rich people, or, ain't nobody gonna hire you just because you read some books. I still remember the day I got the acceptance letter. I had walked to the corner store to check the mail because our mailbox was broken. I opened it right there on the sidewalk. When I told her, she barely looked up from the sink. That's in Northampton, right? Who's gonna pay for the bus when you run out of scholarship money? I thought once I got to college, things would change. That she'd be proud, or at least supportive. But every time I called home, the calls were short. She'd ask if I had money. If I could send some home. If I thought I was too good now. I started limiting the calls. Last spring, during a road trip with two of my friends, Morgan and Janice, we drove back from Cape Cod and passed through Worcester. I hadn't been home in months, and since we were nearby, I thought, why not? I was nervous, but hopeful. Maybe a short visit would be fine. Maybe she'd even be a little happy to see me. The visit lasted 40 minutes. From the moment we walked in, her eyes flicked from my friends to me to their outfits. Morgan had this delicate little gold locket on, nothing extravagant. Janice wore a silver ring she bought in Provincetown. We sat in the kitchen, same chipped counters, same rickety chairs, and I tried to keep the conversation light. I even brought groceries with me, hoping it would make things easier. But she wasn't herself. Or maybe she was, and I was just hoping she'd changed. She kept glaring at the bracelet Janice gave me for my birthday, a simple silver cuff. Nothing flashy. I noticed her jaw clenching. Then she stood up, pointed at my wrist, and said, "That looks a lot like something from my drawer." I was stunned. "What?" "I'm missing jewelry," she snapped. "Necklace, earrings, my ring, gone." I laughed, but it came out wrong, panicked, not amused. "You think I took your jewelry?" Her eyes narrowed. "You always liked those things. Now you come back wearing shiny gifts. You think I'm crap?" I was speechless. I shook my head, trying to form words, but nothing came out. She didn't wait. She raised her hand and slapped me. Right there, in front of Morgan and Janice. I didn't react. I couldn't. I just picked up my bag, told my friends we were leaving, and walked out. The car ride was silent for a long time. My cheek burned. I didn't cry until we were almost back to campus. I told my RA I wasn't feeling well and stayed in my room for 3 days. My friends checked on me. I told them it was fine. It wasn't. A month later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a receipt. The pawn shop was on Chandler Street, 5 blocks from my mother's house. I used to walk past it every day on the way to school. The receipt listed 3 items: gold earrings, a sapphire ring, and a gold necklace with a heart pendant. The name signed on the bottom, Nadine Breton. The pawn date? 3 days before we visited. It hit me like a truck. She'd already sold the jewelry, then turned around and blamed me for it. Slapped me for it. Humiliated me. I called the pawn shop. The man on the phone said the items were sold the day after they were brought in. Gone. Irretrievable. I hung up and just sat there, shaking. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't call. I didn't text. I blocked her on everything. I didn't even tell Felix. He was still at home, and I didn't want to pull him into something he wasn't ready to see. I started therapy. At first I told myself I was doing it for school stress. For time management. But week after week, the sessions always led back to her. To that house. To that feeling of never being enough. Of always being the target. I haven't spoken to her since. She's posted a few things on Facebook, vague things about ungrateful children and how some folks forget where they came from. My aunt tagged me once, asking me to call my mother. I didn't reply. Felix texted me on my birthday. No mention of the fight. No mention of the receipt. Just a photo of the 2 of us from when we were kids. I cried in the library bathroom for 10 minutes. Felix started messaging more frequently after that birthday photo. Just light things at first, memes, school stuff, pictures of the dog. Then one night, around 1 a.m., he sent me a text, "Did something happen with Mom?" I stared at it for a while, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to dump everything on him. He was still living in that house. Still walking on the eggshells I had managed to leave behind. I typed out, "Yeah. It got bad. I just needed space." He read it immediately but didn't respond. Not until the next afternoon. I thought she was lying. That stopped me. I asked what he meant. He told me she had been saying I'd stolen from her. That I'd come back acting high and mighty and then take what wasn't mine. She brought it up more than once, usually when she was drinking or in a bad mood. He said the story never added up. One week it was a ring, another week it was earrings, and sometimes she said she found the jewelry again but that I had still disrespected her. Felix said he kept quiet because he didn't want to believe it was true. I told him about the receipt. Sent him a photo. His response came after a long pause. She always said people would leave her. I guess she made sure of it. I think that was the first time I realized he might understand more than I gave him credit for. Around that same time, I started getting these random friend requests and DMs from people I barely knew, old neighbors, cousins I hadn't seen since middle school. One of them, a woman named Carlene who used to babysit Felix and me when we were little, messaged, "I heard you're not talking to your mom. Just want you to know, we saw what she did. You didn't deserve that." That message undid me. I cried again, which was becoming more of a regular thing than I liked to admit. But it also made something in my chest loosen. For so long, I'd carried this idea that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I'd been too proud, too dramatic. But people had seen. People had known. And no one said anything. I guess that's how families work sometimes, everyone tiptoes around the volcano, hoping it won't erupt. In class, I found it harder to concentrate. Not because I wasn't interested, I loved what I was studying, but because every discussion about relationships, family systems, or psychological trauma hit too close to home. I started writing about it in my essays, carefully disguised but always there. My professors left quiet comments in the margins. Thoughtful. Encouraging. One of them, Professor Lang, pulled me aside after a seminar. She was older, with kind eyes and a voice that carried weight without ever needing to raise it. "I hope you know," she said softly, "that it's okay to walk away from pain. Even if it shares your last name." I didn't answer. But I thought about that sentence for days. Meanwhile, my mom kept posting. Not every day, but just enough to get under my skin. She posted photos of her and Felix, always with captions like, "the one who stayed," or cryptic quotes about loyalty and betrayal. People would comment with things like, "You raised them best you could, Nadine," and "Kids these days don't know sacrifice." It made my blood boil. But I didn't respond. I just kept blocking. Felix came to visit during a long weekend. He took the train to Northampton and stayed in my apartment's spare room. It was the first time we'd spent more than an hour together without Mom nearby. He looked older. Not just in the face, but in the way he carried himself. Tired. We stayed up late one night watching movies, eating microwave popcorn, and halfway through Good Will Hunting, he turned to me and said, "I think she's sick." I paused the movie. Like. Sick how? He shrugged. Not physically. I mean, maybe that too, she's always coughing now. But I meant like. Inside. Her head. She doesn't trust anyone. I think people are out to get her. She's always angry, even when she's alone. I started recording some of the stuff she says. Just to remind myself it's not normal. That hit me hard. Because I'd done the same thing once, back when I was 16. I used to keep a journal of all the things she said to me. I called it the Book of Proof. I'd write down every insult, every accusation, every time she called me selfish or ungrateful or worse. I thought if I had a record, maybe someone would believe me. I asked if he still wanted to stay with her. He said, "Not forever." I'm trying to figure out how to get out. But it's hard. I understood. We didn't talk about it much after that. But we stayed up until dawn, eating cold cereal and reminiscing about the dumbest stuff, like the time we got stuck in the neighbor's shed during a snowstorm, or when our dog crawled under the bed and refused to come out for a whole day. For a little while, it felt like we were kids again. The next morning, as I watched him pack up his bag, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in a long time. We could still have a relationship. Not the one we grew up with, but something new. Something real. He left behind a drawing he'd done, just a sketch of the view from my apartment window. Simple. Peaceful. Underneath it, in his messy handwriting, he'd written, "You don't have to go back to the fire to prove you survived it." I kept that note in my fridge. Still do. The calls from my mother stopped eventually. Or maybe she gave up. Or maybe she just found someone else to blame. But Felix didn't stop calling. And little by little, we started building something different. Something honest. About a month after Felix's visit, I got a letter in the mail with handwriting I didn't recognize. There was no return address on the envelope, but I opened it anyway, thinking it might be from one of the scholarship foundations or some alumni newsletter. Inside was a single page, written in blue pen, on lined paper. It started with, "You may not want to hear from me, but I had to say something." It was from one of my mom's old coworkers. Sandra, I think. I vaguely remember her from when I was a teenager. She'd come by the house once or twice when they worked the same shift rotation at the nursing home. She had kind eyes and always wore those brightly patterned scrubs with animals on them. Sandra wrote that she had quit the care center last year. Said she couldn't take the long hours, the lack of support, or Nadine's moods anymore. She said my mom was always on edge, suspicious of everyone, prone to sudden outbursts even in front of patients. Sometimes she'd accuse people of stealing lunch money, or pills, or the charger from her phone. The part that stood out to me was this: she said you took from her. Said you embarrassed her. But I remember the day she pawned those things. I drove her there myself. She asked me to stop on the way to work, and I waited in the car. She came back out with cash and a cup of coffee. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have. My hands were shaking when I read it. Not from anger this time. Just this deep, bone-tired sadness. This confirmation that it really did happen, that it wasn't some overblown thing I'd invented in my head to justify walking away. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had been there. I folded the letter and tucked it into the same drawer where I'd kept the pawn receipt. Later that week, Felix and I talked again. It had become routine by then. He'd call during walks to school or send me voice notes about his classes. I never pushed him to talk about Mom, but when he did, it was like opening a pressure valve. This time, he mentioned something that caught me off guard. "She started asking about you," he said. I stayed quiet. "She wants to know if you're ever coming back." "She doesn't say it like she misses you, though. More like, she's confused that you stayed away this long." I took a deep breath. "Did you tell her about the receipt?" He hesitated. "I told her I knew about it. I didn't say how." "What did she say?" "Denied it at first. Then blamed you for making her feel like she had to do it." I closed my eyes. He continued, "She said you always looked down on her. That you thought you were better." I couldn't help it. I let out a bitter laugh. All I ever wanted was to make her proud. "I know," he said. "I think that's why she couldn't handle it." We didn't say much after that. Just silence, soft and full. The kind that sits between people who understand each other but don't have the words for it yet. That weekend, I went to a little cafe downtown to read and get some air. I hadn't really processed how much time I'd spent inside, in my head, turning over the same memories like stones. The cafe was small, just a handful of tables and a chalkboard menu, but it was quiet. I took a corner seat, ordered tea, and pulled out a book I hadn't touched in weeks. That's when I noticed a woman sitting at the table across from me, probably in her 60s, sketching something in a leather notebook. She had a calming presence, like a librarian or a retired artist. At one point, she looked up and asked me what I was reading. I told her. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours. Her name was Joy, and she used to teach art therapy. She told me about her mother, too. Not in detail, but enough that I understood she'd walked through a similar kind of fire. At one point, she said something I wrote down on a napkin: "Some people confuse love with control. When you stop letting them control you, they feel unloved. That's not your fault." I still carry that napkin in my journal. The next few weeks were a strange blend of clarity and heaviness. Like I'd finally stepped out of the storm, but everything was still soaked. I'd catch myself thinking about the kitchen in my childhood home, the sound of the fridge humming, the way the linoleum curled up at the corners, and then remember how small I used to feel in that room. Like I had to shrink myself to avoid setting her off. I started to talk about it more in therapy. The layers of it. Not just the slap, or the accusation, but the years that came before. The 1,000 paper cuts before the final blow. And slowly, I started putting my story together. Not just the version I told others, but the one I'd hidden from myself. One night, I went through an old box I'd kept from high school. It had old notebooks, a few birthday cards, a cracked snow globe Felix had given me when he was 9. I found my book of proof. The journal I'd used to record all the things she said to me back then. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before I left for college. It said, "She told me I'd come crawling back when the world kicked me around. She said I'd never be loved if I didn't know my place." I don't want to believe her. But I keep hearing her voice when I'm scared. Reading that now felt like hearing a younger version of me calling out for help. And I think, no, I know, I've finally answered her. That night, after rereading the journal, I didn't sleep much. I just lay there in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The voice in my head, the one that used to sound like my mother's, had started to soften. Now it was mixed with my own. Older. Wiser. Quieter. The next day I went back to therapy and brought the journal with me. My therapist, Leah, took one look at the worn cover and nodded like she understood what it meant before I even opened it. We spent the entire session reading pieces aloud. It was like exhaling after holding my breath for a decade. One of the entries mentioned a specific morning, how she'd thrown a plate across the kitchen because I'd used the last of the milk. I hadn't thought about that in years, but the memory came rushing back, me crouched in the corner, picking shards of ceramic out of the linoleum, while she muttered under her breath about how I was just like him. She meant my dad. The man who vanished without ever explaining why. Leah asked if I ever felt the urge to reach out to him. I hadn't. Not once. He was a ghost. My mother had done such a thorough job of making him the villain in every story that it never occurred to me there could be a version of him I might understand. Or one that might understand me. Still, the thought stuck with me. That week, I tried to focus on school. Finals were creeping up, and between work, class, and trying not to drown in unresolved family trauma, I barely remembered to eat most days. But I was doing okay, better than I had in a long time. Then, Felix called me again. It was around 10 p.m., later than usual, and I could tell by the static in his voice that he was outside. She left, he said. I sat up in bed. What do you mean? She just packed a bag and walked out. Said she needed space. Didn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. I blinked, stunned. Did something happen? He hesitated. I told her I was thinking about moving in with you. That hit me hard. I hadn't expected that. We'd joked about it before, in the vague way siblings do when they want to escape but don't have a real plan. I didn't mean right away, he added. But I think it scared her. Or maybe it made her angry. I don't know. I asked if he was okay. He said he was. That the house was quiet. That it felt strange not to have to walk on eggshells. I thought I'd feel bad, he said. But I don't. I feel calm. I knew exactly what he meant. We talked a while longer. I told him he could come stay with me whenever he was ready. No pressure. He said he'd think about it, then changed the subject to something lighter, some video game he was into, a girl he liked at school. For a while, it felt like the past didn't exist. But once we hung up, the silence returned. I couldn't help but wonder where she went. If she was alone. If she was okay. And I hated that part of me still cared. That weekend, I got an email from an old high school teacher, Mrs. Keene. She was one of the few adults in my childhood who ever seemed to see me clearly. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she must have heard something through the grapevine. She said she'd been following my progress. Apparently Felix mentioned me once in a school essay. She said she was proud of me. I cried again. I wasn't trying to be someone people were proud of. I was just trying to survive. And now I wasn't just surviving. I was actually building something. There was this moment, a few days later, when I walked into the small campus library to return a book. The late afternoon light was coming through the high windows, and the dust in the air made everything look golden. I watched a student help another with a stack of books and thought, this is what peace feels like. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet and slow and mine. Later that week, Felix texted again. I found one of her old journals. Didn't know she kept any. I stared at the message for a while before asking, are you going to read it? He replied, already did. Then, after a pause, she wrote about you. A lot. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she'd said. But he continued, it's not what you think. Some of it's twisted, yeah, but some of it. I think she really didn't know how to love us. That was a hard sentence to sit with. Because I had spent most of my life trying to decode the things she said. The way she looked at me. The contradictions in her behavior. I wanted so badly to believe that underneath it all, there was a version of her that loved me. But it had always felt like trying to read a language I was never taught. Felix sent a photo of one of the pages. It was messy handwriting, same blue pen. At the bottom, a line was underlined twice. I don't want her to hate me. But I can't stop resenting her either. She reminds me too much of everything I lost. I stared at that for a long time. Not because it excused anything, but because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are hurting themselves in ways we'll never fully understand. About 2 weeks after Felix shared the journal entry, I started sleeping more soundly. It wasn't a conscious shift, just something I noticed one morning when I woke up without the usual knots in my chest. Maybe it was time, maybe therapy was working, maybe the act of speaking truth aloud had finally lightened the load. Felix kept checking in. His messages were less about our mother and more about what his life might look like without her hovering in the background. He asked if I thought he'd make it in Northampton. I told him the truth: you'll struggle. You'll miss her some days. But yeah, I think you'll make it. That seemed to be enough. He moved in at the beginning of summer. 2 duffel bags, a backpack full of notebooks, and a look on his face that reminded me of how I must have looked that first day I left home. Scared. Free. We settled into a rhythm quickly. He picked up a part-time job at a bookstore near campus, started a few community college classes online, and helped around the apartment without me asking. For the first time, we were building a life together, not surviving one. Then came the letter. This one wasn't handwritten. It was typed, printed on thick paper, and signed in ink. From a law firm in Worcester. I stared at it on the kitchen counter for a full 5 minutes before opening it. Inside, the first words hit me like a punch: notice of intent to pursue legal action. Apparently, my mother was threatening to sue me for defamation, emotional distress, and damages caused by spreading false information to family members, former coworkers, and social media. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so theatrical, that it felt like something out of a bad TV drama. But underneath the absurdity, I felt the old fear rise up. That familiar, nauseating anxiety that had followed me around since childhood. The kind that made me question everything: my memory, my choices, my sanity. I showed it to Felix. He read it twice and said, "She's bluffing." I agreed, but I needed to be sure. I took the letter to the legal aid office on campus. The woman there, a no-nonsense paralegal named Alora, read it and let out a soft snort. "This is nothing," she said. "Empty threats. But we can respond, if you'd like." I nodded. We drafted a formal response, citing Sandra's letter, the pawn shop receipt, and Felix's first-hand accounts. No insults, no emotional language, just facts. Alora sent it on my behalf and told me not to worry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about legal threats. It was about control. She was flailing. Desperate to reassert dominance now that I wasn't playing by her rules. So I decided to take it a step further. Revenge, in its cleanest form, isn't rage-fueled. It isn't cruel. It's truth, exposed in the right light, at the right time. I wrote an article. Not a blog post, not a social media rant, an actual piece. I pitched it to a mid-sized online magazine focused on family, relationships, and healing from trauma. I didn't use names. I changed identifying details. But I told the story, every cracked piece of it. The slap. The pawn shop receipt. The silence. The healing. It was published 3 weeks later under the title, "When Cutting Ties Saves Your Life, Growing Beyond a Parent's Pain." It spread fast. Thousands of shares. Dozens of comments. People emailed the site asking for more stories like it. Some wrote in to say they felt seen for the first time in their lives. I didn't expect any of that. I just wanted the truth out of my body. A week after publication, Felix got a call from my mother. He didn't answer. She left a voicemail, tight and controlled. "I know that article was about me. You've embarrassed me. You and your sister both. But if she thinks this is over, she's wrong. Felix played it for me. We sat on the couch, letting her voice wash over us, then disappear. We didn't respond. Instead, I sent a copy of the article to the law firm that had sent the letter. I attached a simple note: "This is the only response I'll be giving. Best of luck moving forward." We never heard from them again. What came next wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no showdown. Just silence. She stopped calling. The Facebook posts dwindled to vague song lyrics and recycled quotes about loyalty. I heard from Carlene that she'd moved out of the house, started renting a room in someone else's place across town. A few people tried to guilt me back into her life. I didn't take the bait. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to live well. And that's exactly what I did. I got a fellowship the following semester. Felix transferred into a nearby program and started painting again, something he hadn't done since we were kids. Our apartment became a small, quiet space filled with music, mismatched mugs, and the kind of laughter that only comes when you no longer have to look over your shoulder. We still talk about her sometimes. Not with hate, just perspective. We wonder what could have been. What might have made her softer. But mostly, we talk about the future. The fall semester came and went like a gentle blur. I didn't realize how much emotional weight I'd been carrying until I felt what life was like without it. No more scanning every text message for hidden meaning, no more jolting awake at the sound of my phone ringing, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just quiet. Room to breathe. One afternoon, while I was packing up my laptop at the campus library, I got an email from the editor who published my story. She said it had become one of their most read pieces that month and asked if I'd consider writing more. More. The word sat in my mind like a seed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the edge of campus, found a bench overlooking the little duck pond near the science building, and just sat. I watched the wind ripple across the water, felt the sun on my face, and for the first time in years, let myself imagine a future that didn't revolve around surviving my past. That night, I told Felix about the email. He was sitting on the floor, organizing his paint tubes and trying to mix the perfect shade of stormy gray. "Do it," he said without hesitation. "If your words helped that many strangers, imagine what they could do if you kept going." So I said yes. I began writing monthly for the site, sometimes about family, sometimes about resilience, sometimes just about learning to live again when your roots are tangled. The responses were humbling. Not everyone understood, of course, but the ones who did? They reached out with stories of their own. The kind you don't share at family gatherings. The kind you whisper into journals and therapy sessions and late-night text threads. Felix read every piece before I submitted it. Sometimes he'd add a line of his own at the end of my drafts, something poetic and unexpected. One time, after a particularly raw piece, he scribbled in the margin, "Survival is not the climax. It's the prologue." He was right. About 6 months later, I got an email from someone I hadn't heard from in years. My father. It was short. Just a few lines. He'd read the article, someone from back home must have shared it with him. He didn't say much. Only that he was sorry. That he'd left because he was drowning, and he thought we'd be better off without him. That he'd been wrong. I sat with that email for days. I didn't know if I wanted to respond. I still don't know if I will. But for the first time, I felt something besides resentment when I thought of him. Curiosity. Maybe forgiveness starts there. Not with big declarations or tearful reunions, but with a pause. A breath. A space where anger used to be. My mother never reached out again. Not directly. But every once in a while, someone from back home sends me screenshots, vague Facebook updates, recycled old photos, a comment she made under a post about estranged families. I don't engage. It's not that I hate her. I don't. I've just outgrown the version of myself that needed her approval. I'd built a new life with boundaries and softness and truth. One that doesn't require me to shrink. One that allows me to be both a daughter and a survivor. Both broken and whole. Felix is thriving. He's looking at art programs now, something with sculpture. He says working with his hands helps him understand things his mind can't explain. We still have our inside jokes. Still share frozen pizzas and sit up late talking about the things we never had words for as kids. And on quiet nights, when the world feels still, we sometimes imagine what it might feel like to visit Worcester again. Just to pass through. Not to stay. Not to forgive. But to reclaim. Maybe someday. But for now? We're good right where we are. And if there's any revenge in all this, it's this simple truth: we got out. We got better. And we never had to become her.